The Close Weekly podcast gives you the most actionable real estate advice you can use today. And in Season 2, we're focusing on how you can succeed in 2022's low inventory market. Now, here's your host, the man who has been a top producing agent for over 25 years, Sean Modry.
Welcome back. I'm excited about today's guest, Barry Habib. Barry Habib is a 3-time Crystal Ball Award winner for accurately predicting the real estate forecast ahead in 2017, 19, and 2020. And today he's going to share with us what he sees ahead for us in the real estate world. Before that, though, I would like to introduce our season sponsor, Elevate by Elm Street Technology. Elevate is more than a CRM. With social media posts, IDX website, and easy-to-use lead generation, Elevate provides everything you need to capture and convert more leads. Elevate even has an easy time-saving CMA wizard, which lets you create and share CMAs in just minutes. Interested in trying Elevate yourself? Then check it out at tryelevate.com. That's TRYELEVATE.com. And schedule your free demo today. Now, let's hear from Barry. Welcome, Close Weekly. It's Sean Modry, and we are back for another episode of the Close Weekly podcast. And I have been excited for this guest that's coming up today. In fact, I've been trying to pin him down. He is so busy. I had to beg him to get on today, and he's excited to be here. His name's Barry Habib. Now, Barry Habib is the CEO of MBS Highway, the industry's most highly regarded and recognized tool for transforming salespeople into advisors. He has frequent appearances on CNBC and Fox, and he is a 3-time Crystal Ball Award winner for 2017, 2019, and 2020 by Zillow and Pulseonomics for the most accurate real estate forecast out of 150 top economists in the nation. So he knows a little bit about what we're speaking about today. Good morning, Barry. How are you?
It's great. Good morning. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. So, we talked a little bit offline. We're working with a bunch of real estate agents out there, and there's a lot of disruption going on in the market right now. A lot of confusion. What do you think is going on?
Well, there's a lot of things at play here. So one is inflation. The other is the result in interest rates moving up, the Fed's reaction to it, and of course, then the impact on real estate. So we know that the real estate market's been really hot, but there's a lot of talk now about the real estate market. Is there a bubble? It's been going on for quite some time. But there are also indicators that would point us to a recession coming up. So how does that affect interest rates? How does that affect the housing market? And it's really interesting because it's counterintuitive. So we did accurately forecast the 2020 recession, which happened in January of 2020 before all the lockdowns. And when we forecasted that correctly, there were certain indicators that we watched very carefully. For us, we did forecast in the fourth quarter of 2021. We said that we see a recession coming at the end of 2022 or 2023, the first half of 2023. And now it seems like so many people are talking about it and jumping on our bandwagon. So let's break down what's going on first, what it means for recession and how we can prepare for it and how we can explain it to our customers. Because it's not what you think. It's not the terrible result for real estate that you might think. So first off, let's talk about inflation because that's the driver of what we see happening with interest rates. So interest rates are driven by inflation. Very few people really understand that. So when interest rates go higher, most of the time, and the biggest factor of that will be because inflation's moving up. So what's inflation? Inflation's too many dollars chasing too few products. It's happening right before our eyes in real estate. Too many buyers, which represents too many dollars, chasing too little inventory or too few products. So what's happening is that the prices are inflating, prices are going up. So that's what we're witnessing here. That's inflation at play. And because of supply chain disruptions, chip shortages, and obviously the unfortunate circumstance in Ukraine, where the Russian invasion of Ukraine is causing a lot of other disruptions in the supply chain. Ukraine is the number one producer of many things that are very important, like sunflower oil, for Europe, wheat and barley. But more importantly, for chips is neon gas, number one producer in the world. 70% of the world's neon gas comes out of Ukraine. So why is that so important? Well, not for neon signs, but it's a critical element to go into chip production. So that's why taking chips into consideration and the supply chains, why it takes so long to get a car, or why homes can't be delivered. You've got new construction homes for sale, 407,000 for sale, but you can't move into them. Only 35,000 of the 407,000 are where you can move into the actual home. So this is a situation, because the globe is so interconnected, that we're seeing prices rise. And when inflation rises faster than incomes, it causes misery, because your standard of living is dropping. Now, what is important, Sean, for us to understand is how it affects interest rates. So if we all, for a minute, imagine that we owned a fund, and that fund, now our job was to do mortgage transactions for people and put out mortgages with that fund. Well, the receipt for putting out that mortgage is a fixed payment that you get every month for a long period of time, for many years, up to 30 years, let's say. And that payment stays the same that you receive. But meanwhile, inflation is making the things that you need to buy go up in cost. So what it's doing is it's eroding your buying power. Look, if you get a check as someone who's issued a mortgage and granted a mortgage to somebody, and they're paying you $2,000 a month, you get a check every month for that same $2,000, but it just doesn't go as far. The buying power is being eroded over time. So when things are low and inflation is low and prices are increasing by a very small degree, well, I can afford to charge a lower interest rate, because my buying power is, for the most part, being preserved pretty well over time. But if inflation starts to go up, my only defense to protect that more rapid erosion in my buying power is to charge a higher interest rate. And that's what you're seeing. A year ago, inflation was about 1.5%. Today, it's about 8%. So because of that, we've seen mortgage rates go up from 2.5% to 5%. So here comes the Fed. So when the Fed increases rates, there's nothing to do directly with mortgage rates. Mortgage rates could be out there for 30 years, but the Fed controls something called the Fed funds rate. And that's instrumental in loans like personal loans, car loans, credit cards. But the really big money is in commercial and business loans, where if a company wants to expand, acquire another company, these are where the tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars come into play. And that is really what drives a lot of economic activity. Now, if you make those borrowing costs go up, then what happens? You slow down economic activity. Also, if you raise the Fed funds rate, banks can start to offer higher rates in savings accounts. So maybe you save a little more money. What both of those things do is take money out of the system, which means, remember, what's inflation? Too many dollars chasing too few products. So now you take money out of the system, you reduce the demand part of it, and then you slow inflation. That's what the Fed wants to try to do. Now, what's interesting about this is that when the Fed does this and is successful, by hiking rates, mortgage rates, which care about inflation, come down. Because hike rates, inflation comes down, and mortgage rates come down. We saw this in the late 70s. Inflation went from 7% to 14%. And under Ronald Reagan, Paul Volcker comes in as a new Fed chair. And what he did was he took the Fed funds rate from 11% to 20%. So he raised rates 9%, but mortgage rates dropped 6% from 18 to 12. Under Alan Greenspan, same thing. He watched inflation move up. Inflation went from 1.5% to 3.5%. He started hiking the Fed funds rate. He hiked the Fed funds rate almost 2% a year. And what happened to mortgage rates? Well, mortgage rates, because inflation came down, the economy slowed down, mortgage rates came down by 3%, from 8.5% to 5.5%, sparked a big refi boom, big housing boom. So now what Jerome Powell's seeing is he's seeing inflation go from 1.5% to 8%. Mortgage rates have doubled from 2.5% to 5%. And what the Fed started to do is they've just inched up the Fed funds rate so far. It was at 0. They moved it to 0.25%. We believe they're going to move 0.5% in May, 0.5% in June to try and slow down inflation. Now, if they're successful, mortgage rates should drop. We've seen this every time. But what also happens is every time the Fed's tried to fight inflation, we get a recession. And that happens over and over and over. Now, with respect to what the Fed will try to do here is slow down inflation, but this time's a little different. You see, the Fed has another tool, and that's their balance sheet. And this is where we've seen a lot of movement lately, and it's important to understand this. So the Fed has tried to stimulate the economy. They've been buying mortgage bonds and they've been buying treasuries, because the more purchases of that, the more buyers of those things, the lower the interest rate has to be offered to incent people to buy those items. So that pushes interest rates lower. And that's what the goal of quantitative easing was. Let's buy these securities and make interest rates go down. They were very successful. We've seen very low interest rates. But now they've got this bloated amount on their balance sheet of about, believe it or not, $9 trillion. And I know we've heard trillion, but it truly is, while we become immune to the name trillion, it's an incredible sum of dollars, $9 trillion. So there's talk of them now allowing this to be reduced. Normally, it would reduce anyway, Sean, under normal circumstances, because think about it. If I have a mortgage and I refinance and I pay off my old mortgage, if the Fed was holding that paper, then it would reduce the balance. If I sell my home and I pay off the mortgage, or I refinance, that would reduce the balance. Or even all those people that have mortgages that the Fed is holding, as you make your monthly payment, remember, a chunk of your monthly payment goes towards principal, which reduces your balance. It's just like, if your bank issues you a statement, you make the payment, your balance starts to go down, down, down. Well, in this case, like the Fed's the bank, and your balance should be dropping, except for one thing. The Fed has been taking the amount that their balance sheet would shrink or be paid down, and they're reinvesting it in mortgage-backed securities. Now, that's been about $70 billion a month. That's a lot of money, right? Well,
are they doing that to stimulate the economy? Are they doing that to keep the housing?
They were doing that to keep the economy humming and to keep interest rates low. Yes, exactly right, Sean. But now, with inflation being hot, there's talk of the Fed reducing its balance sheet. It could be called runoff of the balance sheet, different terms, but essentially it's balance sheet reduction. Just recently, we heard one of the influential Fed members, Lael Brainerd, who's kind of like second in command. She's going to be the vice chair. She said, we want to let that run off rapidly. That caused a lot of panic in the bond market, and rates went up. Now we just got the minutes of the last Fed meeting, which was 3 weeks ago. And in there, it actually laid out some guidance. The guidance said that they want to reduce their balance sheet by about $95 billion a month. It would take 3 months to get to that level. So they ramp it up over 3 months. They like doing that. $35 billion a month of mortgages and $60 billion of treasuries. So what that means is less Fed buying. That money is out there. Who's going to buy these things?
Yeah, that was my first question. Now, who buys it?
Yeah, who buys them? People like you and I and our mutual funds and our 401ks, retirement accounts, it'll be purchased. Thing of it is now is with less buying competition, what happens when there's less buyers out there? When there's less buyers, the price of security has to come down, or in an interest rate environment, to give you an incentive to step up and buy more, I have to offer you a higher rate. Right? Give you a better return. So that's why we're seeing interest rates move up. So here's what this plays out to be. There's going to be a period of time here, and we call this, Sean. I mean, you know, if you listened in Christine Beckwith's presentation that I did, we laid out how month by month inflation was going to go up, and as a result, interest rates had to follow suit and go up. And sure enough, that's played out exactly as planned. But the thing of it is that if we do get a recession, and we think we will, I'll give you a few reasons why. During recessionary periods, mortgage rates always come down. Our last recession, mortgage rates came down 1% from 3 3/4 to 2 3/4. The one before that, it went from 6 to 4 7/8. The one before that, it came down about 1%. The one before that, it came down by 3%. The one before that came down by 5%. So in each recession, mortgage rates come down. And I think the same thing will happen here. So as we look a little further down the road, during a recession, whether we're right and it happens first half of next year or not, could be a little earlier or later, there's going to be a period of time where the rate that you have today, that you're looking at roughly 5%, there'll be a pretty good opportunity to refinance it to a lower rate, whether that rate comes down to 4, 3 3/4, 4 1/4, 3%, but they will come down to a level that will be more attractive than today. So this is a bridge that we have to cross. It's not a trend where mortgage rates aren't going to go 10%, but
Do you think they're going to go as high as like 6 or 7?
I don't think 7. I think they'll stay under 6 for sure, but they might elevate a little bit further. It really depends on what inflation does. A lot of the inflation that we're seeing is because of supply chain disruption. So can we get the supply chain kind of fixed? Can we do something to promote some additional drilling in the United States, which would help alleviate oil prices? We've temporarily seen a bit of a reduction because of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve release. That'll give us a little breathing room, but that's not an answer. That's a Band-Aid. That's just robbing from Peter to pay Paul. It's like, okay, I'm going to pay my bills this month by taking it out of my savings.
Right.
Well, those savings should be replaced, and you're going to probably have to buy it back at higher levels. So it's a very short, myopic strategy. It's not a good strategy. The real answer is regulation has to ease up so you could do more drilling. And we'll see how that goes. I don't want to get political here. I'm just saying that it's a supply and demand issue, right? We're using more than we're producing, even though we're producing a lot. And if we're able to encourage more production, then you will bring down prices. It's a very simple mathematical equation.
Do you think that we're in a housing bubble right now? I mean, that's
we're about to. That's exactly where we're going, and that's exactly where we're headed. During recessionary periods, interest rates come down, but now as we turn our attention to what is the result of that for the housing market, it's actually really good. In our last 9 recessions, home values have gone up during 8 of them, and then went up a lot after each of 8 of 9 recessions. The one anomaly was when we had the housing bubble in 2007 and 8. That peaked, and it was such a terrible bubble. The reasons for that was, think about the types of mortgages that were being done. First of all, people having 4 or 5 or 6 homes, okay? In addition to that, you had nothing down, which was 100 loan to value, no income verification, no asset verification, credit score at 580, you're going to get approved. Investor properties. This was not a very healthy amount of loans that were being done. And that's what really caused the housing bubble, and that's what led us into the recession. So that wasn't the one period of time where housing didn't do well during recessions, but it's explainable because of the housing market, and we're very different than that now. And here's the other thing, is that the main driver of the housing market has always been demographics. So in 2022, the median age of a first-time home buyer is 33 years old. That means they were born between 1988 and 89, depending on when they were born. The crop of first-time home buyers that we're seeing today based upon their births from 33 years ago shows that if you look at the previous year's births, they were lower, which means last year's crop of first-time home buyers, that vintage came up. This year's will be a greater number. And guess what next year's will be? A greater number than that, and the year after a greater number, and it stays elevated like a staircase. So there's going to be more demand coming. Okay, these people were already born. They're coming of age to buy their first home in greater and greater numbers into the future. So that puts more stress on demand. What about supply? Well, quite simply, builders are not keeping up. And if we want to compare it to the housing bubble, one of the reasons why, you can look it up on CNBC, we correctly were the first ones to say there was a housing bubble. I used to get hate mail, is because we looked at the same demographic chart. Let's take 2006, when we correctly said that there seems to be signs of a housing bubble for us. We looked at the birth rates from 33 years before that, which was 1973. If you look at the chart, birth rates plummeted in 1973, which told us there's going to be a lot less demand in 2006, 33 years later. There was a reason for that. Abortions were legalized in 1973. Birth rates naturally dropped. They stayed low for a while before recovering. And 33 years later, first-time homebuyer chart looks exactly the same. Big drop, 33 years after births dropped to 2006, stayed low for a while, and then recovered into the future. So this is a very good barometer that tells us that demand will be strong. Now, the other part of it is supply. In 2006, when we had the housing bubble, builders built over 1 million homes more than the demand. Same thing in 2007. By 2008 and 2009, you had a full-blown bubble. Today, it's the opposite. There are more households in demand than builders are putting up. And if you want to know why there's such a hot housing market, why there's such strong appreciation, and why there's very low inventory, you need to look no further than households being formed versus the builders that are putting up homes.
Mm-hmm.
That spread is what's causing the disruption in equilibrium there, and why the housing market's so hot. Now, can builders catch up? It's hard for them because supply chain disruption. You know, chips go into everything. You can't get chips. Why it takes so long for a car? You know, people say, okay, there's a lot of homes for sale on the new construction side. Yeah, there's 400,000 homes for sale. It's not that big of a number, but it seems like a lot. But homes that you can move into, out of the 400 and change thousand homes, it's only 35,000 you can move into.
Yeah.
So there is a difficult time delivering the homes, and of course that demand keeps growing. Mm-hmm. So it's not an easy answer for this, Sean. But what it tells us is that the housing market will be pretty well supported. There's a few other things we should know. Inventory levels. During the bubble, there were 3.7 million homes for sale in 2007. That was like when we knew there was a bubble because it's just too many homes for sale. Today, there's not 3.7 million homes for sale. There's 870,000 homes for sale. So there's almost 3 million fewer homes for sale. Now, at the same time, that household growth, in 2007, everybody in the United States lived under 116 million roofs. That's the amount of households there were. Today, there's 130 million households. So what does that tell us? From 2007, if you want to think bubble, well, there's 14 million more households, but there's 3 million fewer homes. How can you possibly have a bubble? Now, so what we think is that you're not going to see 19% appreciation. We'd be really happy with 5 or 6% appreciation because that's really healthy. And think about this. If you buy a home, you put 10% down, you get 5 or 6% appreciation. Let's say 50 or 60% return on the dollars you invested. It's still an amazing way to create wealth. But we do not see the factors in place for bubble-like conditions. It's easy to say it. It's easy to call it. It's easy for the media to sensationalize it. But factually speaking, there's too much demand, not enough supply, which is the invisible hand of number one rule of economics is supply and demand determines price. You also have rates that are still accommodative. You also have, if there is a recession, history tells us that rates come down and housing does well. And with regards to the future of interest rates, there's a lot of evidence that points to interest rates coming back down to lower levels, which would add to the benefit of affordability. I'm not saying affordability is easy today, but it's not as bad as you would think. You know, we did a study and we said, okay, a year ago, mortgage rates were about 1.5% lower than they are today. And if you took an average mortgage and you said, how much did the monthly payment go up from a year ago to today because home prices went up? 18%. Interest rates went up. Let's call it even 2%. The mortgage payment went up on that average home like $600.
Yeah.
That seems like it's an awful lot of money, right? But then if you take the household income relative to that, it went up by $900 or $850. Now, listen, that's perhaps an oversimplification because you could say, look, well, other things kind of have gone up in price too, so you got to account for that. Yes. What I'm trying to say is you can't just look at the price increase without looking at the income increase. And to a very large extent, the price increase is softened or mitigated by the fact that people are also earning more at a very good clip. The private sector is going up, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 11% from last year. So that does offset to a great extent the overall cost experience that you're seeing come up in your expenses. So
that's really bullish. Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, what about the impact of these institutional buyers, right, that are buying, last I heard, 600,000 residential properties across the United States, taking the inventory away from the consumers? And I even heard that recently, and I think it was maybe Georgia or South Carolina.
It's all over. It's all over. A lot of these iBuyer platforms, there's a lot of this going on. And we have to be careful when we say taking it away from the consumers because it's still made available to a consumer. It just depends on what type of consumer. Are you a consumer who's renting or are you a consumer who's purchasing? So when you remove those single families from the purchase environment and turn them into rental units, it's still out there for the consumer. But what it's adding to the rental inventory, which also is depleted. I mean, think about this, Sean. Rents went up last year over 17% in a year. And in many markets around the country, much hotter than that. You go to Miami and you go to it's over 30%. Okay, so 17% increase in rents. That's no picnic. So I got to live someplace. Where am I going to live? Am I going to live with mommy and daddy? Oh, I don't even have to go into the detail as to why that might not be your best choice. Okay. Number two, I can rent.
Yeah.
But not only did the rents go up 17%, but now every year I'm going to get hit with that rental increase. Or I could buy a home, which is not easy.
Yeah.
Inventory is tight. It's expensive. But at least once I fix that payment, then I'm fixed. And my income continues to rise to make every year that mortgage payment easier. I mean, everybody out there, think of a couple of things. One, on your own purchase of a home. Remember when you purchased that home, you're probably stretching on the mortgage, but then the mortgage payment gets easier as it remains fixed and your income goes up. So relatively speaking, it gets more comfortable. The other thing is, how long have you ever held on to the same mortgage? I'm not saying the same home, the same mortgage. Chances are you probably average less than 5 years. So how can we offset this? Well, number one, listen, you're probably going to refinance in a year from now anyway. Why not look at adjustable rate mortgages? And let's just take a 5-year adjustable, which is going to be about 0.5% cheaper. So that takes a lot of pressure off of the rate increases we've seen. That's going to cut about 1/3 of the increase that you've seen. So that'll help. You might say, yeah, it's 5 years. That seems short. Do you know that mathematically speaking, compared to a 30-year fixed, that the 5-year adjustable has to be cheaper no matter what, even if everything gets terrible? Has to mathematically, because remember, you saved enough money in the first 5 years to make you cheaper for the next couple of years. So you've got about a 7-year period of time where no matter what happens, you have to mathematically be cheaper. Now, 7 years is a long time. Have you ever had the same mortgage for 7 years? Probably not. Here's the other thing. That's if the worst case scenario happens, which is highly, highly, highly unlikely. If you say, okay, let's assume the Fed raises rates 3%, and the index that would typically govern what the adjustable would have to go up 3% plus the margin. That would be an adjustable rate that would be a range of 5.75%. Well, do you know under that circumstance, so after the first 5 years, at, let's just say 4.5 or 4.25, and then after that at 5.75, you're mathematically cheaper in a realistic sense than a 30-year fixed for the first 10 years. I'd venture to say very, very few listeners here have had the same mortgage ever in their lifetime for a period of 10 years or longer without having to either moved and paid it off or refinanced and paid it off. So there are ways to mitigate this. I mean, look, I know that we're going through a period here that is more uncomfortable and creates fear and anxiety and worry. I get that. Seeing rates go up so quickly, seeing inflation, seeing all the concern about is there a housing bubble. Now add the talk about a recession. It can get you to a point where you're a bit overwhelmed or worried ourselves. Now we've got to hold the hand of our customer and walk them through this, right? But what I'm here to tell you is that you will see rates come down next year. You will probably see a recession, but a recession is not bad for either interest rates or housing. So with respect to this investment, it's a good thing. And with respect to the basic underlying tenet of prices, supply and demand, how will you reverse the demand? These people are already born. They're already coming. Where are you going to put them in a rental? With it going up dramatically, you're going to put them in a purchase? And how are builders going to keep up with the overwhelming demand that's out there? Could it turn over a long period of time? It's like this is a gigantic cruise ship. It's not a sports car. A sports car could do this around a turn. This, if it does turn, it's going to take a long time. And remember, there's a big difference, Sean, between slowing appreciation and depreciation. Right. If the market's going 80 miles an hour down the highway and it slows to 30 or 40, you're still gaining. That's very different than going from 80 miles an hour, stop, put it in reverse, and go 20 miles an hour in reverse. That's the difference, and the media screws it up all the time. Slowing appreciation is still appreciation. It's actually better, healthier. It's not going to be depreciation.
Well, it deflates the bubble instead of pops the bubble, right? Like you can slowly deflate a bubble without popping.
We're not in a bubble, but we are not in a bubble. We're in a housing boom, not a housing bubble. In 2006 and 2007, as we correctly said, we're in a bubble. It's not like I've been this perma bull in housing. Oh, housing. No, when we saw the signs that mortgages did not make sense to me. Okay. I couldn't see giving somebody a mortgage just because they could fog up a mirror. Here, you're approved. That did not make sense. The same person owning 6 homes
Yeah.
did not make sense. Doing mortgages for people who didn't have the credit capability, that didn't have any income, that didn't make sense to me. Today, it is very strict to qualify. Plus, you have a couple of different things that have happened. You've had so much appreciation gain, so much today. The average loan to value of a home is about 50%. That means the average person, let's just say if you got a $400,000 home, 200 in mortgage, 200 in equity.
Right.
So if that individual, heaven forbid, gets in a little bit of trouble where they're out of work, they can't make their mortgage payment, that will not be a foreclosure. They will take that property and they will sell that property to protect their equity. We're not going to see foreclosures. You're not going to see, oh, I got to drop you. So they will sell that home, and there's such a starvation for inventory that they'll sell that home quickly. Now, if more inventory comes on the market that way, then of course, that's why we're seeing not 19% appreciation or 18%, but let's bring that down to 10, 8, 5, 4. This is really, really healthy, but we're not going backwards.
Oh, man, that was amazing, Barry. I so appreciate the time that you took with us today. And I know our listeners are going to love this. If somebody wanted to learn more about you or get in touch with you, how would they do that?
So MBS Highway is our site. I'm easy to find on social media. So, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, I'm very easy to find. So we can communicate there. But yeah, thank you, Sean, for the time today. And thanks for doing such a great job for everybody and bringing great information to people.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Bye, everybody.